All right, I think we'll go ahead. And so everyone knows we will be recording this program. And so by attending, you're all agreeing to be recorded. If you want to speak when we have discussion later, we'll have the Q&A and the chat both open throughout the program. I'm Laura Keim, and I'm Stenton's curator. And joining me today behind the scenes is our program director, Rachel Korma. So she's sitting behind the facade of Stenton. And then here next to me are Claudia Levy, who's our landscape architect, and our artist, Karyn Olivier, who probably needs no introduction to many of you. But Karyn's going to primarily present the updates to the Dinah Memorial Project. We were just remembering, because of COVID, actually, it's been since November of 2019 since we had a kind of a gathering of community members to update on the design and take in new thoughts and reactions from community members. And it's just hard to believe how much time has actually passed. And indeed, the design has continued to evolve as we've worked toward actual construction drawings and now funding. And I'm pleased to say it's really looking very positively that we will have a realized memorial this spring. So, and we're hoping that it can be in time for the Stenton Garden Party on May 5th. So please do keep your fingers crossed, because yeah, contractors and supply chains and all these things that you've been hearing about could affect us, but we're really working on this timeline and hoping to be breaking ground quite soon. So I'm just to, again, introduce Karyn briefly. Many of you may know that she was born in Trinidad and Tobago. And today she actually is a nearby Germantown resident. So it's exciting for us that Karyn is actually part of our community. And she also teaches art at Tyler School of Art, a Temple. And interestingly, we were also just kind of remembering this too, that Karyn and Claudia at slightly different times both went to Cranbrook. So they both have art backgrounds from the same place. And it's interesting to think about that Claudia's is in photography and Karyn's training is in ceramics. So here we have Claudia doing her wonderful creative work as landscape architect, and Karyn as in effect, really conceptual artist. And really just as you'll remember, as we get into the presentation, I think the strategies for bringing the humanity of Dinah, this once enslaved woman who saved Stenton from burning by the British in 1777, and our ability to still connect with her on a very human level, as well as create space for ourselves in the present that we hope can bring a kind of a reckoning and healing space into the landscape at Stenton. So with that, I'm very excited that we've continued to work on this and that we have Karyn here this evening. So I'm going to fade into the background.
No, not the background. Wait, so we don't see people. Bummer. I just realized, like, where are the faces? Where are the faces?
I know. It's the webinar.
The webinar
I guess you can't change that part way through once that is established.
Okay, that's okay. I can picture the names I see that I recognize and all that. So it's funny, I was putting together, looking at my how many iterations of this proposal and project and PowerPoints. And it was amazing to feel, I mean, as an artist, it doesn't always, sometimes the work, you're super excited about it, and then it starts to be less interesting, or it doesn't have the power. And I was kind of excited that it still feels like it's gonna serve each of us in kind of unique ways, or the possibility that it's gonna do different things at different times, depending on what day you're having or your age or over. I feel as though this is both timeless and it still feels very timeless. Of course, we don't have the thing yet, but it feels very timeless, but also very specific, that it can actually kind of engage where you're at that moment, but also a reflective piece. So I was pretty excited to see it again and be like, oh yeah, this is gonna be, and this is partly because of Claudia and her amazing, I mean, more than a landscape architect, has really helped me kind of understanding kind of what I believe that this could be, and kind of helping to figure out the concrete stuff to make it actually what's in my head and what's in my heart. So I'm going to just share, I'm gonna, okay, I don't want to do that yet. Sorry, this damn Zoom. Give me a second. Okay, there we go. Okay. All this shuffling of this mouse. Okay, here we go. Okay, so again, the title right here, I still feel like that title just kind of brings us to the present, and almost like hoping that people could just be like, a presentness seems to be important, especially when we're dealing with memory and reflection, and almost like a person that we can never know, but what does it mean to kind of try to be present in those thoughts, present with who we're with, present with her. So I still feel like the title is a good one. So again, some things have changed. We've changed it from this kind of circular bench to being this geometric form. And to me, something that's interesting about the geometric form allows for a certain containment, or like a shelter or definition of what that space, or what's the inside and outside that space. So it was Claudia's idea to have this curved interior. So now we're focusing on this like two different geometries that kind of point to two different things. So I think the geometry, this kind of circular interior, I think works so much better with having this kind of geometric border. We had a lot of conversations and about how to deal with the ground, like how do we protect like the landscaping that's there, the natural environment that's there. Also issues about thinking about ADA and accessibility. So we thought about these, what are they, like pebble stones that would be in the center. And I actually think that could be kind of nice. It's going to function as good for the environment and also good for kind of like maintenance. But I think it could be interesting, something about like also like hearing your feet on that could be another kind of awareness. I also think it will kind of blend in really well with the piece. We're still going to retain the, it's no longer going to be a fountain, but we're still going to have like a bird bath, and it'll be the same look in terms of being a black stone. I'm still planning to have the two exterior plaques. This one is the updated one. On the other side will be the original plaque honoring Dinah. The questions, I mean, some of you may have been part of that meeting back 2 years ago, where we really kind of dug into the questions. And it was kind of great having the community members there. And I did change some of them on the queue of actual members who were there, but also, so some of the questions actually changed. I actually eliminated 2 of them. One was added. What's her name? Valerie, what was her last name, who sadly died, questioned me about this one, the second to last question, did you ever wish you had let it burn? So I thought that was really kind of this obvious question, but it was kind of amazing to hear someone in the community raise that. And to me, it seemed like the most pivotal question, but I also didn't want to end with that. So I kind of was thinking about the balance between aesthetically, what the questions, how the questions look. Was it mean kind of a flow of questions that are both past, recent, present, present or future? So I was playing around with how the questions, the order of the questions, and I kind of came to this that felt pretty right. I think it works in terms of flow of reading them, considering them, and also aesthetically and how it feels this frame of the silhouette. And again, I'm using this imagined silhouette. So I can't remember if this was the final design from back then, but this is, I kind of wanted a form that could be, of course it's anonymous, but I thought the braid kind of added this kind of texture, kind of something concrete to the portrait that may allow you to imagine. There's something about the braid and this hairstyle to me makes me think of, like, maybe at the time they're saying most servants would have had, you know, a headscarf on, But if you went out, or if you had like your day of like leisure, maybe you would have done something differently here. So I thought it was important to have this hair that could be kind of recognized, like it's something about it being distinct. So again, here are the questions in case it was hard to read there. And again, the other side were the questions that imagining that Dinah is asking you. So here's the plaque, and again, the plaque will be kind of refurbished and cleaned before it's inserted into the memorial. I can't remember if we had decided on Kasota limestone, but this is the same stone that's on the PMA, and it just seems to be a great. There's a warmth to it. There's kind of there's a warmth and I don't know, like almost like humanity to it. There's something lovely about the different ways the stone looks depending on the finish. So we actually decided we're going to kind of exploit what the stone has as opposed to adding other stones into the piece. There's a lot of textures and kind of emotive responses based on how the finish happens. So we decided we're just going to focus on this stone. One thing that's going to change is, first I was thinking about having like this black stone that would be the silhouette. And of course, I'm making references to the 1800s of using this on black cutout. A lot of people could be aware of a contemporary use of that with Kara Walker. But there was something about it that we just kept talking about. There was something about it, I kind of enjoyed the black stone at first, thinking when it was unpolished, it had a grayness, but I didn't know if it was too ghost-like. And we talked about it a lot, Laura, Claudia, and I started feeling it was too ghost-like. And then when it was highly polished as black, it maybe felt too stark, maybe in contrast to the actual stone. So there was a lot of like thinking this through and having different tests and actually seeing samples of it being done to see what would work. So this was I mean, it seems like a little thing, but there are very few elements to the piece. So how they work together was pretty critical to kind of make sure it's the right combination. So we've actually changed it where it's going to be, I'm sorry, this is just a small image. We're actually going to finish the silhouette in a different finish. So it will read distinct from the greater surface of it, but you'll recognize it as a portion. There's something about it that could be, it's very distinguishable to see, but there's also something about this this vacillating, this kind of movement that happens. It's also, we're also going to do something to the edge. That's going to also be another kind of finish. And then we were trying to think of, originally I was thinking of, I'm going to go back, of this kind of bronze letters or gold, but now we've done all these samples. We're realizing that, again, the engraving in the letters is going to create a different texture and almost a different it will almost read like a different material. So we decided, let's just stick with the stone and just engrave the letters in. We might add, I think we're still not sure. I think it's going to be the one, I'm sorry, this picture doesn't give exactly what it is, because right now there was a brown stain in it, a black stain, and just the carving in. And I think I'm settling on the carving in. I think because it's a natural material, it's going to change over time. I think if anything, it's going to become the shadow of it will be even more revealed after the wearing of it happens. So it's going to read more like what you see at the bottom one. We changed the location. At first we were thinking it was going to be up by I can't remember when we decided to change this. We know it's going to be now the entrance by, I guess Laura could talk about that, where the new fencing is going to go. And in a way, it's almost catty corner to the Logan. I think it'll be great because people will be able to see it from the North 18th Street. So I think there's a kind of a nice way of like welcoming you in. If you come to Stenton House, of course you would engage the memorial, but also I think potentially a passerby walking by will see it and be invited to it, and there will be an entrance to the site from there. This is to show you kind of like the diagram of how the space is, it's increased in scale. It's now, what is it, 10 feet? I think before it was going to be a little smaller than that. This is some images to show you kind of on the top here, you can see where the plaque will be embedded in the back. This, you can see how it sits on the seating. And this is a finish, but we haven't completely decided on this, but we're thinking there could be something kind of a decorative element that could be along the edge. So it's going to be something like, this is not the same stone, but it's to show you kind of what it would potentially look like, that edge. So we're thinking about that. And those are like, I think that might be my last image. I can, oh, people aren't here. Well, they're here, but they're not here. I could stop sharing. I could always go back to to show you images. But that's kind of the basic, I mean, a lot of changes. It's the same idea, but I think if anything, it's just become stronger in these changes that have happened with the design.
Thank you. I had not unmuted myself. Jenna Whalen had commented that she asked us to share the images of the plaques again. And so Jenna, I don't know if you want to type in if you had, if there was a question you had or something related to the text, either the historical Dinah plaque or the new plaque with the quotes. New wording versus old.
I could bring that up.
So I should just say, by way of background, the historic plaque is from 1912 and was erected in Stenton Park by the Site and Relic Society of Germantown, now the Germantown Historical Society, and the Colonial Dames and private subscribers. And we haven't been able to actually really identify who all the private subscribers were. It's kind of shocking that there's not just a list that we've been able to put our hands on, but one was probably Albinus Logan, who lived at Loudon in Lower Germantown. He and his sister Mariah, who was a colonial dame, lived there together. And there's some newspaper articles about his involvement, and it sounds like he was somewhat of an instigator in making this happen. So there's the original, the 1912 plaque says, in memory of Dinah, the faithful colored caretaker of Stenton, who by her quick thought and presence of mind saved the mansion from being burned by British soldiers in the winter of 1777. And so a lot of this project has really been about creating context around that in terms of who she was, the story as it evolved over time from 1777 all the way to 1912.
Yeah, and I thought it's interesting to include it, partly because of it's a historical document. At the time, it was one of the few kind of memorials, plaques to a Black woman. So it was pretty, you could say it was a pretty progressive act then, but in light of 21st century, it's not enough. But I thought, what would it mean to have a plaque as well? I think about a plaque as being a more formal acknowledgement or recognition or commemoration. So I think that's interesting to have it on the exterior, this kind of formal, and then inside are these kind of personal questions. So I thought it'd be interesting to have those too. And because I wanted some sort of symmetry, I thought, what would it mean to have another plaque that could maybe speak, and the quotes aren't from, this year, but a more contemporary reading that could be a way of signaling the possibilities for this kind of new kind of memorial. So that's when I thought of these two quotes, healing begins where the wound was made. And I literally couldn't choose. But there's something beautiful about that, I mean, we could think about that in terms of, there's so much, I could think about Black pain and all, it's endless. I could think about healing begins where the wound was made. But then I thought about this Lorraine Hansberry, that I'd never be afraid to sit a while and think. And in that, so that's an obvious invitation into the space, but it's also, a very in a benign kind of way, or kind of like a very almost like generalized way, but then never be afraid to sit a while and think. There's a vulnerability in that. What does that mean for me, and where am I in relationship to the legacy of Dinah? Am I Am I frustrated with this country and what hasn't happened? Or am I grateful for where I am? You know, I just thought it would be an interesting phrasing of like, what does it mean to sit and be present? I often think about memorials, you know, some people, when they visit them there, if it's a personal thing, they're invested in it and they will spend time. But often if it's a history that's very old, people don't spend the time. So what does it mean to kind of ask you to spend this time with her and with each other, you know? So they're very different, but I thought I read them both as almost like an invitation, but also as this, they are talking to each other as well in a way.
Is there, we have another question. Is there a plan to put the plaque into modern context about who the dames are and the use of the word colored? Certainly, certainly there is. And so far we don't have a lot of signage in the landscape. Maybe we will choose to have an interpretive sign that is there for everyone to read. We have a QR code currently adjacent to the Logan Memorial that gives information. And so we probably need to make a decision about how we want to put some interpretive information out there to make that available. But absolutely, that is a word that we want to talk about and put into context. And our exhibit in the third floor also does some of that work for us already. Particularly, it's rather fascinating that Deborah Norris Logan in 1805, at the time that Dinah died, describes her as our faithful old Dinah. And so even this, what we think of as a very colonial revival concept, but that it really goes back a long way, and these kind of very complicated relationships that slavery created, and family structures that are also equally complicated.
And the word colored was the word that was used in the time. It's also time specific, period specific, you know.
The words on both plaques lead to other conversations, a great springboard. I think that's very true. Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about, Karyn, this week is, you know, how you got to the concept of questions as a way to kind of get to know a person. And I was just reminded last week about a 2015 New York Times article by a woman who'd run across a study, and it was about, I think it's 36 questions to love. So more questions than your questions here. But this idea that you can ask another person things that get progressively more intimate and actually sort of fall in love with them in the course of asking these questions. And then adding to that you have to stare into their eyes for 4 minutes. Mm-hmm. And we don't get to see Dinah's eyes, obviously, but I was just thinking about how I think the questions really do so genuinely ask us to get to know her on these terms, and to just consider her humanity. And perhaps they are, in a way, kind of asking us to fall in love with her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that.
Well, and it's such a I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's such a surprise, I think, or will be such a surprise to walk into a memorial and then be asked questions about yourself. I just think that makes the whole thing feel alive, mm-hmm. Which is a really wonderful take on the idea of a memorial, which they tend to be sort of at arm's length a little bit. So I think it's a beautiful way to activate that space within, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how people respond and react to it.
Yes, I don't know if there are any further sort of questions about kind of the evolution of the design, but one thing that I've been struck by all along is, Karyn would make mock-ups and bring them out into the landscape. We still have these sort of like cardboard things sort of smushed into a closet at Stenton that we were playing around with. And the mock-up sort of basin. And this was like right before the COVID shutdown, I think, is when this particular meeting happened.
The day before.
The day before, that's right. It was like Friday the 13th. And I was so the leaves on the trees weren't out, were not out. It's still like that kind of wintry early spring light. And I remember being so struck, particularly Karyn. The sun just came across in such a way that Karyn was talking and she was animated, and her head, it became a silhouetted shadow right on the cardboard basin.
Right.
And just thinking about how this is also going to feel at different times of day and different times of year as it's inhabited by other human beings, and how we're going to all bring our own shadows and likenesses and aspects of ourselves into this space to kind of play with Dinah. I think visually, truly, it's hard to see it just from these images, but I think this really is going to have, a real vibrant life once it's created. Looks like there is a question about planting, and in parentheses, the meadow areas around the memorial. Will it be shifted to encourage visitors to engage with the beautiful design? And maybe we should talk about the siting just a little bit, Karyn. I don't know if where that slide was in your sequence here. There we go. Because actually at the time that when we started out, and at the time of the call for proposals, we thought we were going to want to put the memorial here. And this represents an old walkway out of an original side door that seems to have had 18th century terraced gardens going off to the east here. And then this corner of the property has in it the Colonial Dames 1911 Colonial Revival Garden, and where we placed what was originally created in 1939 as the Logan Memorial, but came to this site in 2018, is just almost on axis with the garden. And so we keep this path mown through our kind of shady urban meadow here. And one of the reasons we decided to move it was to partly access in terms of, at the time that we were thinking about plumbing and electrical and how we were going to manage that through this historically sensitive landscape, just became a really big undertaking. And we still will have to have archaeological surveying going on as we excavate for the footings for all of this. But we have a much easier site in terms of it's been much easier on our budget. And ultimately, we decided to simply have a reflecting basin, and we're not going to have plumbing in it. We're really just concerned about maintenance as such a small site, and that kind of we maintain a sort of low tech, let's say, historic atmosphere. And I think this will help it to just fit in more with all the other features at Stenton. And so it does really very much relate to this Logan Memorial siting. And for us as a staff and as the Colonial Dames, the Logan Memorial was a great inspiration for this project, because we were installing it just as Charlottesville was happening, and this sense of urgency about memorials, and this notion that we were going to take on stewardship of a memorial to an enslaver, and we also steward a tablet memorial to a formerly enslaved woman. And how are we going to tell these stories together? And so this really is a kind of full realization of that idea. And that's why the project, as originally the community engagement part of the project, was called Inequality in Bronze. And it's Karyn's name right here that is the official name of the structural memorial. But Claudia, I don't know if you want to say anything about the planting, because this has really been Claudia's scheme. And I should also just back up and say that kind of all the way here from the barn in the left-hand corner, I don't know if my cursor is actually showing. I think it's showing, but I'm sure it's not.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
I'm helping.
Karen's. So if you draw a line down to the bottom point and back up and around, so like down to the corner where we've reopened an old gate. This is now the primary arrival, and following the perimeter of the park around the garden to the sort of top point. That is a screen of native plants that was designed by John Caspar Wister in 1912. 1911 is the design, I should say, and which has been sort of intermittently planted and maintained, and we've been continuing to rejuvenate that. And so this really does kind of sit right up against this screen planting here, and Claudia has created essentially a memorial specific design, landscape design.
Which I don't think we have here to show, but the idea is that the memorial is kind of nestled into this meadow setting, and then with the historic screen planting on one side and the meadow on another side. But it's also, this idea that it's now near the main entrance. So it's so much easier to access. And it's almost like a little, like a front room in a way. It's a little room in the landscape. It will kind of relate to the mansion in terms of its geometry a little bit, but then also relating to the setting around it. But I think you'll feel very much like you're in the meadow, and in the natural environment here. And that's, kind of what we wanted the focus on the natural materials, and then the qualities of the natural materials to help bring out the various details of Karyn's concept here. I think we're hoping that it'll all be very, very well integrated. And there will be pathways. So there'll be a pathway off of the driveway, pretty short pathway that'll lead into the memorial. And then I'm hoping that we'll be able to connect another path out of the memorial and into the sort of path system throughout the whole Stenton site that we're sort of trying to implement a little bit at a time over the years.
So I'm not sure if there are any other questions, but the other comment I was going to make about the evolution of the design, one being the Casoda stone, and Karyn talked about this a little bit, but that it has this inherent warmth and softness that some of the original proposals were in more of a gray kind of stone, and some of the feedback had initially been, oh, that this has a funereal feel, and I think that this different, softer, warmer stone makes a huge difference in how this will feel and appear. And by having the silhouette, and actually the tablet, the benches, and the silhouette are all different textures. And so it really is about this sort of singular material, and yet it's different aspects that are just created out of finish. I think there's just something a little bit magical about that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, something too about how you'll notice the wetness will be different, how it feels on the polished part compared to the, it's going to let nature do almost like more magical because it is a singular material.
Yeah, and I do have a question in the Q&A here. I'm just going to switch over. Okay, so there are actually a couple questions here. So I'm getting, I guess I'm getting a historical question from a historian. So George Boudreau has asked, can the memorial put Dinah into context? other enslaved people in Germantown, in Pennsylvania. We do that at Stenton, that we very much put Dinah into context. And currently we have an exhibit in the 3rd floor that talks about Quakers and slavery in Pennsylvania, Dinah's family and her bringing them together at Stenton, and mentions 1st generation enslaved people at Stenton as well. So we do have that happening. So it won't happen specifically in this space. But one of the things that we've been talking about too is honoring all the enslaved who were at Stenton. You know, that Dinah has been held up by community pride for a long time for this notion of saving the house. And yet there are other people we really would like to also honor their humanity and memory. And so that we do tell those stories that we can and know, and also continue to research. Oh, and here's one from Ann Doley. I've not been inside, but she came to the storytelling performance that we had in October of 2020 during the pandemic, with Irma Gardner Hammond as older Dinah and Marissa Kennedy as younger Dinah. And you can find a video version of that on our website as well, on the Dinah page. So I would, if you're interested in that, you can take that in video form. She says, I've read as much as I could find and have many more questions about Dinah's life, but more so at this moment. I was wondering if you, in your indoor exhibits, if we pose questions about the Logans and their ownership of enslaved people, because I would question their humanity. How do you deal with that? I mean, wasn't Dinah part of a wedding dowry? That is so egregious. And that's true. Indeed, ownership of other human beings is a tremendous wrong, a tremendous violence. And yeah, we do talk about that. I think probably I would say because we have a guided experience that various people probably take that in at the level that they're able to confront that. But it's, it's very clear in terms of what we're presenting that even just things like family separation and so forth, just the incredible violence of all of that as an institution. And that it's dehumanizing. So this is a very small way of recognizing humanity of someone who was dehumanized from the moment of her birth. Let me see if there are any others in the chat. There was one question also about where Dinah's burial might be. And I don't know, Karyn, too, it's kind of off the map, but if you wanted to show the plot plan again.
Oh, did I miss it? Okay. Are you seeing the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So we, as part of the project, we had the initial Inequality in Bronze project, we had money earmarked to do ground penetrating radar surveys, because both some of these early kind of 1910 newspaper articles, as well as a postcard that had been part of the Stenton collection, which just showed that granite slab with the plaque on it, had a caption that labeled the plaque location as Dinah's grave. And so where that would be kind of in relation to it's very close to the present day rec center, sort of just a little bit in this direction from that. And so we did surveying all around there and did not find anything. At the same time that that granite slab that was on became a drinking fountain in the 1970s as well. And so you do have to wonder about the level of excavation that would have happened around it. We also did ground penetrating radar over top of, some of you may be familiar with the Logan burial ground that's out in the park, and kind of would be sort of, I'm not sure if I'm going quite in the right direction, but sort of out from where it says Future Hemlock LA. That was meant to, that's one of our intentions, is to hopefully either use actual hemlocks or something reminiscent of hemlocks, because they are subject to various diseases today. But there was this row of hemlocks that went out to the Logan burial ground, and those bodies are still there. But I was just going to see if I could easily pull up from my documents, and I think I've got it here.
You'll share the screen?
I can't share my screen, I don't think. Or maybe I could, but it'll take a moment. I'll just read this for now. So in February of 2020, just before the COVID shutdown, and ironically, sort of right around the time that Deborah Norris Logan made this entry in her little pocket almanac from 1805, that was February 21st, she wrote down, February 21st at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, our very faithful and good old Dinah breathed her last. Was buried the 23rd in my garden. She had requested during her lifetime to be interred at Stenton. So we don't know exactly where that was, but going back to the site plan, we were just looking at where I mentioned there was this old door and the path and the terraced garden that went off to the east. Somewhere in that landscape, and it's hard to know on which side of the current fence it might fall, but that would be what we think was Deborah Logan's garden. And so she would be in that area, kind of almost where we were thinking maybe originally we wanted to put the memorial. So there's still a possibility of trying to find remains in the future. It's just that we need to probably figure out how we could target the area, because it's such an expensive process to go looking.
There was a question in the chat about the accessibility of the third floor exhibit. So I just wanted to point everyone to the Stenton website where the Dinah project page lives. So if you go to www.stenton.org/Dinah, you can find a lot of resources. And if you click on the research tab, you can actually pull up all of the exhibit documents that are a part of that third floor exhibit, along with a lot of other research that has been done during the project.
Yeah, and it is quite a number of steps to climb to the third floor, but also as part of the project, we opened a room that had been formerly used for storage. And it is a room that I feel strongly probably enslaved people slept in. And so there is a sense of really bringing that space into our regular tour that began during the project as well. And there's a comment, I think the memorial is beautiful and very moving. Thank you, Anne. When would construction installation begin? Very soon. We would, if we can get the contractor lined up, we can start digging before we get really cold weather, so that we can, I don't know, Claudia, would we even be able to pour foundations maybe, or do we have to probably wait until it warms up?
It's hard to say.
It's hard to say, yeah.
I think that we have a lot of stone fabrication to be done in where the stone is actually coming from Minnesota. And there's the actual installation in the ground probably will take around 4 weeks, maybe a little more. So they may decide to sort of schedule it for early spring, late winter, early spring. I think, it used to be a big problem to pour concrete when it was cold. Nowadays, they have ways to do it, and it's fine. Yeah, it's all a question of just getting all the pieces of the puzzle together and ready to go. But I think, we're really hoping to start. I mean, I kind of, my gut feeling is that it's probably better to do it in a concise period of time rather than starting it and then leaving it open over the winter. I mean, sometimes it's good to leave things over the winter, but I don't see an advantage here necessarily. But yeah, there's just a lot of, we've been, because everything is kind of pending getting the funding secured and a lot of decisions about details and, various aesthetic decisions. We're right now, I think we're really poised to go forward on a lot of these things. But I think it's from my perspective, it seems very realistic that we would be able to have essentially, an unveiling at the garden party in the spring. Might be lots of little bitty plants and mulch and things like that, but that's okay.
The landscape always evolves over time.
Yes.
And speaking of funding, so we do actually have an open challenge from a Logan descendant, and his name is David Hickok, and he has already given us $10,000 and has said he will give us another $10,000 if we raise $10,000. And we have a campaign going for Logan descendants, but at this point, we also would like to just open it up to the general public and anyone who would like to support the memorial at any amount. And David Hickok would be matching your dollars. So I think Rachel might be able to put the donate here page into the chat for everyone. So you could bookmark that. And if not, just you could simply go to the Stenton page. We do have a donation button, and you could give us a call or send a check, or I wouldn't suggest sending cash, but no donation is But I feel also it's very special. David Hickok feels, I think for him, he actually is a practicing Quaker as well, and has been talking about this project. He lives in London, and he's been talking a lot about this project with Quakers in the UK, and brought some attention to it there. And I just think he is very moved by all of this, and calls this memorial a mitzvah for society. So I hope we can all share in his sense that it is indeed a mitzvah. Yes, this ended up being a pretty intimate group. I almost wish that we had done, as you suggest, Karyn, everybody has their place on the screen, because it would be nice to really be having a true discussion. And we have not yet had sort of larger in-person gatherings at Stenton and indoors. Oh, there's a Minnesota dame interested in the stone coming from our state. Can you say where the source is for the stone? I might leave that to Claudia if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's Cold Spring granite, or Cold Spring, maybe not granite. There's actually a Cold Spring in New England as well. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know the town where it is. But I'll just reiterate what Laura said in the beginning, which was that we were looking for a stone choice that had the right physical qualities, a kind of a warmth and a softness to it, But we also wanted something that had some significance locally. If we couldn't get a stone that was actually local. And the Philadelphia Art Museum is all clad in this very beautiful, warm, yellowish Kasota limestone. And I believe that this is the only quarry, or at least almost the only quarry that is still producing it. So, you know, we liked that idea that it had a kind of legacy in Philadelphia already, that a lot of people really love that building and love the color.
Julian Abel.
Glowing, yeah. So, yeah, it's the company is Cold Spring. I don't know exactly where they are.
I just put the their web page in the chat, and I have to give a shout out to Amy Cohen. I saw she's on the line. She's a Julian Abel expert, I'll say.
I love that. My Black architect, TMA. That's the stone.
Yeah, and the one other thing maybe I would add too, I'm reminded of this because our public art curator, Nisa Page Lieberman, is also on the line. And in some subsequent and recent conversations, she has shared with me that actually our the whole artist selection process and the community engagement aspect of this, and I don't think I realized this, really has been groundbreaking and innovative, and is starting to set a new standard for the way community engagement is done for public art projects. And so I think we can be proud of ourselves that we were able to do these facilitated discussions, and the having people attend all of those presentations that you all did, Karyn, with and being able to take in the feedback, and so that the result really is not necessarily what the advisors wanted or even the Monument Lab advisors wanted, but what the community has said it wanted to see.
Mm-hmm.
So I see we have a question. Do we need volunteers? Ways to help Stenton? Perhaps when we come to the landscape aspects, there may be things that we might specifically ask volunteers to help with. We can certainly be in touch with all of you who've signed up as we get into the spring phase of all of this. But fundamentally, most of the work is really going to be done by our contractor, our sort of general contractor.
But we do, I will take this opportunity to say that we do always need volunteers to help with the landscape, and there are volunteer days throughout the year, and especially our meadow, which will be the setting for this memorial. I would love to have a group of dedicated volunteers who wanted to learn about the ecology of the meadow and how we take care of it. So absolutely, we always need volunteers. And yeah, I mean, maybe Rachel and I can talk about this afterwards, a kind of way to hook people up with that process.
And there's some enthusiasm for participating in these kind of community engaged processes that I think are just becoming more and more standard practice. And thank you, Nisa, for your comment too. We appreciate everybody staying going during this pandemic, and for all your continued attendance and support. So thank you.
Great.
Well, I think we're coming up on our hour since our start time. And if anyone has a sort of last question they'd like to type in, we can take that last question. But otherwise, I'm just very grateful for your attendance tonight and thoughts in the chat and questions, and just always grateful for an engaged audience and an interested audience. And we do have a lot of continued evolving information about slavery at Stenton that we will continue to grow that body of knowledge and share.
Oh,
You're also welcome.
oh, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Karyn. Oh my. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you. It's an honor to be part of this.
It's like, oh. Well, this is great. I'm glad we did this. We're going to see you when it's time to party and like honor and all that soon enough.
Yes, please put May 5th, 2021 on your calendars, and please keep your fingers crossed every night when you go to bed that our contractor is all lined up and everything came together, and that we will actually have the memorial on May 5th.
It'd be amazing.
You're all invited, of course, anytime, but specifically it's a day that we look forward to celebrating, remembering and celebrating.
Yep. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
I wish I was seeing, and they can't even send us. Oh, well, they're doing that there. Okay, that's good. Thank you all. I'm speaking to the chat stream. Thank you.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Take care. Take care.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.